If you're looking for a little bit of performance, a little bit of luxury without breaking the bank on a slightly older car, chances are you're looking at the top 3 big German automakers. That's Mercedes, that's Audi, and that is BMW. And I'm not here to get into that argument today because God knows the comment section will go absolutely nuclear. But what I am here today is to tell you everything I know about the W212 platform. So if this is something you're considering, you can understand the engine options, the options that you get on the interior, potentially suspension options you might be looking at, and the problems there within. Now, the W212 came out from 2009 and was active all the way out to the 2016 model year. Between that, you have a facelift at around 2014, 2015, and you have multiple engine revisions kind of staggering those facelift upgrades. Now, if you get a vehicle from 2009 all the way to 2012, your engine options range from a V6, a 4-cylinder diesel. I believe you can get a 6-cylinder diesel as well. We're not going to touch too much on the diesels because they're not super common here in the States. I don't know too much about them. And then you also have a naturally aspirated V8. Now, those early engines were port injected, so they didn't have a lot of the direct injection issues that you see on these later engines, but they also don't produce quite as much horsepower. Starting at the bottom, one of the most common engines you're gonna find is a V6 in here, and that's gonna be the M272. It's a very robust engine in here, and it's very common to see these engines with well over 150, 200,000 miles on them running pretty much like new. Stepping up a couple cylinders, you get the naturally aspirated V8. Now, this is a legendary V8. It's very similar sounding and feeling to that naturally aspirated 6.2 in the AMGs. It's a 5.5 designated M273, makes just around 382 horsepower. It's a great motor, very, very long lasting. And because it's port injection, you're not dealing with any of the long-term carbon buildup. And it is very easy to see these engines go well over 200,000 miles while still being beat on and still being maintained correctly. From 2011, you move on to 2012. This is where Mercedes started moving into the direct injection category. So you'll see the introduction of the M27 motors. So the M274 in a 4-cylinder, the M276 in a 6-cylinder, and the M278 in an 8-cylinder, which is what I have here. Now, all of these motors are fundamentally engineered the same, and a lot of them actually have interchangeable parts. So that M276 is quite literally a 6-cylinder version of this vehicle. And when you look at an E400, you have a twin turbo M276 engine, very similar to the M278 with 2 less cylinders, and you actually make fairly similar horsepower as if you remove 2 cylinders. Go figure. And while you won't really find the 4-cylinder too much in the E-Class, I don't believe in the States, you will find the M276 everywhere. It's in the SUVs, it's in everything. And the E-Class especially, it's very, very common to see an E350 in the States, and that's the engine that it most likely has. This engine produces great amounts of power, right around 280 horsepower. It's still not crazy high output, so you're not gonna be worrying about overstressing the engine and running it for high miles. This is known as a high mile engine. However, they do have some significant drawbacks, and they get worse as you go up the performance chain. Starting with the camshaft adjusters, timing chain guides, the top end tends to be harder to lubricate without a check valve installed, and all this stuff I went over in a different video. So if you are interested, I'll leave a link to that below. I go over all the issues that these M27X motors have, so we can dive deeper into them there. The main thing to take away from this is the older engines, 2011 and older, tend to have a better long-term reliability track record, while the newer motors, 2012 all the way to 2014-15, is that first generation of direct injection. So you might have some issues. After 2015 or so, they really start to iron out a lot of these issues, and they tend to be very, very solid. So a 2014, 15, or 16 engine on any one of these M27X motors, it's really where you want to be. Now, all 3 major brands have a performant, non-performance model, if that makes sense. This being the 550, where it's essentially an E350 with a big motor and bigger brakes. You have the 540, I believe it is, with the 4-liter V8, which I believe has twin turbos as well. So very similar setup and similar DNA to something like this. And then you have Audis with the 4.2 and the Audi A6 that you could potentially get in an older vehicle. And that will, again, give you that performance without the massive performance S-line cost or M division car or AMG car in the Mercedes. And that is where a lot of people think they're gonna get a great deal. And I thought that myself, and I ended up spending a lot more on these types of cars and this car than I ever would have thought I would have. And that is the type of car that a lot of people end up going for. They want the performance, they want it cheap, it's a great deal. They said, you know what, yeah, I could throw a couple grand at it, I can fix it, I can maintain it. And for the most part, if you are expecting that and you know what you're looking for and you have the money and you have the bankroll to actually take care of these cars, I would agree with you. They actually are pretty good purchases as long as it's a healthy engine and a healthy vehicle in general. Now, I went through this very similar scenario buying one of these high performance, non-performance vehicles. So it was maintained like a normal vehicle, but it was kind of driven like a performance vehicle. So you kind of get the worst of long-term maintenance in there, if that makes sense. Now, I've documented my journey entirely on this car and I've spent a ludicrous amount of money. I'll link that video down below as well if you want to check out what I've had to spend on this vehicle. If you haven't seen the previous episodes, I have had to do a full engine replacement and a whole bunch of other stuff down the driveline. So if you're interested in looking at that, again, I'll link that down below so you can kind of learn what to expect if the worst thing goes wrong in any of these high-end vehicles. But if you do go with those V6s, those non-turbocharged engines, generally in these older cars, especially when they're port injected and non-direct injected, you'll be perfectly fine. So the W212 comes in two major flavors. You're gonna get a sedan like this, and you're gonna be able to get a estate or a wagon. Not as common in the States, but you are able to find those as well. Like I said, most commonly, you'll find a sedan. It's gonna be a W212, and also the W212R designates the facelift, which is the newer looking front end, newer looking rear end, slightly updated interior, overall just a nice sort of refresh. Now, the base model of these cars do come with 17-inch wheels, but they can fit comfortably from the factory up to a 19-inch wheel. We have seen 20s be fitted to this car, and they do look really nice, I think, when it's just sitting there, but the more you look at it, to me, 20s look kind of goofy on this. I think it might be a little bit too big. I think 19s with a little bit of a drop looks beautiful on this, but I've yet to drop mine. Working on it, stay tuned. Now, with previous generation Mercedes, it was true that the only real vehicles you get with the nice plushy air suspension is those higher end S-classes or higher end SUVs, but with the W212, it started becoming an option. Now, you can get the air suspension on an E350, on an E550. You can also get E550s with coil springs and E350s with your standard coil springs as well. And in fact, the AMG E63 actually comes with a hybrid. You do get your air suspension in the rear, your Airmatic in the rear, but you get your stock coils up front, which are performance coils from AMG. Now, if you're looking for something like an E350 as a daily driver, most likely you're gonna find them without the air suspension, but you can have them optioned with, as I mentioned, and it might be something that you wanna consider. It is a much plusher ride. It handles bumps a lot nicer, and it actually handles and takes curves pretty nicely as well. It is a pretty dynamic system. However, we are talking about aging Mercedes and aging German vehicles, and on the W212s, these are getting around 10, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. Airbags tend to have problems. If you are looking for a vehicle specifically with Airmatic, be aware of the aftermarkets. There are not shocks and are not springs that you can get, air springs rather, that you can get to replace. They're a great aftermarket solution. The airbags themselves are actually not that expensive. It's when you get into diagnosing where leaks are in the tubing, or when you have to diagnose the air compressor in the back and potentially replace that. So it is something to consider. I do know people who have gone completely aftermarket to have a stock airbag setup, but going with aftermarket parts that are more reliable, more readily available, and more affordable to actually get. And then there are others who do a complete airbag delete. So once it goes, it starts giving them trouble. It's gonna cost them 2 or 3 grand to replace properly. They just say, nah, I'm good, and spend $1,500 on stock suspension, and then just having the air suspension warning canceled out and programmed out of the car. This specific 550 was actually one that was optioned from the factory with springs only, specifically because the owner did not want to deal with it long term, and he did actually end up keeping this car right up to around 100,000 miles. So when you're considering the facelift versus the pre-facelift like this one, there's something major to consider, and really it comes down to technology. Are you interested in a more classic experience, or do you want some of that newer technology that a lot of more modern cars have? For example, for safety features, this has Distronic automatic pedestrian braking, automatic vehicle braking, crash detection, things like that. It's got lane keep. It'll pull me back into lane actively by pulling my steering wheel. It's got your blind spot. It's got pretty much all the safety features you really need. The newer ones do have more advanced versions of that. So example, it can actually on the highway, just keep you in lane and center you in lane so you can actually take your hands off, or at least kind of not be as engaged driving. You do have a more advanced stop and go Distronic system. And of course, you do have a difference in the camera systems as a whole. So you have a 360 camera as well on that facelift. The lighting is also different as well. Now this has your premium bi-xenon lights, or whatever it's called, and they do articulate around corners, but the facelift actually has ILS Plus, or the ability to have ILS Plus unlocked, assuming you have that hardware and that lighting package installed. Because if you do, it's a simple software unlock to get the full suite of ILS programmed lights, which is awesome. If you don't know what it is, I think Mercedes pioneered it a few years ago. A lot of vehicles have it now, but it allows you to actually cut out the light where the pedestrians or where those cars are, so you can get the best view of the road without blinding anyone else on it. So sticking with the same theme that the pre-facelift Mercedes gives you a more classic experience, that definitely translates to the interior as well. Now, both interiors are going to be very, very similar. If you get a 2013 like mine, where it's a pre-facelift, you may be getting the updated interior, or a hybrid updated interior. Well, some of the biggest updates that they've done is the steering wheel. I have a newer style steering wheel, whereas the old 4-spoke is more common on the older models. Again, you can very easily replace those if you get a replacement, and that's actually very, very easy to swap over. If you find a new wheel on eBay, even from a newer generation Mercedes, chances are you can swap some things around and make that work no problem. You also see things like the gauge cluster change as well. In some of the early W212 models, you get a black and white screen. So those 09, 2010, 2011, really up to 2012, you get a black and white monochrome screen. On the newer models, you do get color. You'll see the papyrus or tan sort of colored UI, and then you'll get the silver UI on the newest ones, moving into MBUX in the next generation of Mercedes. And again, surprise, surprise, you can swap those gauges as well with a little bit of programming to get your odometer right. Same thing going to a black and white. I actually have a buddy of mine in our W212 Mercedes group that was actually able to transfer a color bi-turbo E63 into his 2011 or 2010 E550, which doesn't even have a bi-turbo, which is funny and whatever, it's besides the point. But he was able to take that color display, the high-end color display, and put it in his basically older black and white base model sort of cluster. And going with the pre-facelift also means that you will be foregoing default multicolor interior lighting if you really want that. A lot of this stuff, like I said, you can either retrofit or you can get aftermarket solutions for. DMP Car Design has a lot of great solutions for this, for their color kits, for their Android kits if you don't want to go sketchy on Alibaba like I did. A lot of this stuff you can retrofit, and you wouldn't really be missing out on a whole lot. Again, I bought this car as a driver's car for the engine, for the looks, and I think that the features that I mentioned, to me, weren't incredibly important, especially knowing that over time, I could swap in a gauge cluster if I wanted to. I really love my steering wheel. It's a wooden steering wheel, facelift design, matches the wood interior. I love it. I'd never change that. But if you wanted to, you can change that as well. So as a general rule of thumb, the facelift is going to get you more internal options, some more toys, some more trinkets, some more technology, while the pre-facelift is going to give you the exact same driving experience with a little bit more classic interior, potentially less things to go wrong, potentially less electronics, but these things that I'm mentioning tend to be pretty solid and really just be personal preference. Now, the one thing I didn't mention is the looks. In around 2013 overseas and around 2014 here in the States, you would get the upgraded facelift look. And I know I mentioned there was 2 body styles. There's actually 3. I probably put a note. There is a coupe, which is actually on the A207 chassis. So technically not a 212. It shares more in common with the W204, a C-Class, but it is technically still this body style. So the coupe version of this vehicle, the A207 pre-facelift, I think kind of looks goofy. The facelift version of that coupe, I think, is one of the best looking E-Classes, or best looking vehicles Mercedes has ever made. And I think one of just the best looking vehicles ever, in my opinion, like main passenger vehicles, I think, ever. I think that they lost some of the identity, but it's so aggressive and sleek looking. As much as I love this classic 4 eyes look, which they stopped in 2013, E-Class always had these 4 eyes, but no longer. It lost a little bit of its identity, looking a lot like an S-Class. Can't figure out if it's a C-Class, an E-Class, or an S-Class unless you're really looking at the back end. So you lose a little bit of that class exclusivity, which I think Mercedes was very good at providing while maintaining proper design cues across the board. But it is a definitely more modern vehicle. And if you look at a 2014 E550, which is the last year of a 550 sedan in the States, in Canada, you can get it up to 2015, I believe. If you look at both of those vehicles side by side, this one will be significantly cheaper than that facelift, even with the exact same options. If you didn't have any of the fancy interior options that you can get and you just went with the 550 base, this thing is definitely going to be cheaper because that facelift just looks so much nicer. It looks more modern and it will hold its value a little bit better. So it's definitely something to consider when you're shopping, when you're selling, or otherwise when you're looking at these cars. You may be able to score a deal if you don't care about those stupid interior features, or you're a DIYer like myself and like to add features in afterwards, whether it's aftermarket or retrofitting. That might be the way you want to go. So that is pretty much it, guys. I want to thank you so much for watching. I hope you gained something from this. I tried to kind of mind dump some of the major facts about these vehicles that I have that I think might be helpful for you if you are trying to decide between those big three and you kind of landing on a 212. There's a lot of options out there. If you're looking for a basic get-around car, an E350 from 2009 to 11 is fantastic. If you want a little bit more performance, those M276 V6s and up are fantastic as well, as long as you keep on the oil changes. And if you want something even funner, you can get an M278 or the big brother cousin that's based off of this engine, that E63. Now, as these cars get older and get onto the 10 or 15 year range, it's gonna need more and more maintenance, and they're gonna need more and more love, and you're gonna need to know what you're looking at, which is why I highly recommend you guys installing and getting the hardware for Zentry. And I did make a quick video just kind of introducing it to people who haven't heard of Zentry and how you can get it yourself and do dealer level diagnostics at home. But if you're interested in that, I think it is a absolutely non-starter. You have to get that if you have one of these cars. Otherwise, you'll be going crazy. If an engine light comes on or something happens, just scan it in your driveway. You don't have to go run into the Mercedes dealership, you know, get a loaner and get a ride there, get a ride back. And, you know, then you're on the hook for $384 just for them to look at it. That's an actual price from my local Mercedes dealership. That's not a made up number. It's crazy. If you guys have any questions, any comments, any concerns, anything I left out, and more importantly, tell me about those diesels. I don't really know a whole lot about the diesel motors, so if they're any similar to the family of engines that I've talked about here, definitely let me know. Any knowledge you can spill, I really, really appreciate it. It helps out everyone looking at this video, potentially looking to get into one of these cars. But again, thank you so much for watching. Guys, we hit 1,000 subscribers, and I know I've been absent for a little bit due to some personal things and some car-related things, but we are back. I got new wheels on the car again. I'll go over all that stuff in a future update video, but I want to thank you guys so much for the support, so much for the 1,000 subscribers. Let's try to aim for 2,000 before the end of this year and see if we can continue to grow and create more and more W212 content for YouTube, because we all know there is a lack and a void. So thank you so much for watching. I love you. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe below. It helps me out a lot, and I will see you in the next one.
You never know, acting up the pros.